In 1529, when he was about 51 years old, Sir Thomas More was one of the most well-respected and powerful men in Europe. He was the Lord Chancellor of England, meaning he was the highest-ranking authority after the king. He'd studied at Oxford, he'd practiced law, been elected to Parliament, been elected Speaker of the House of Commons, he'd been knighted, and he had published several works that had been read throughout Europe, including one that added a word to the English language we still use today, utopia. A mere 5 years later, Thomas More was a prisoner in the Tower of London, where he was deprived of even books or a pen, so that the last letters of Thomas More, including a beautiful one to his daughter, were written with small pieces of coal. And then on the basis of false testimony, he was executed. The cause of More's troubles, as you may know, was King Henry VIII, who also had 2 of his 6 wives executed, who confiscated the property of the church, which had been providing for the poor and those in need, and still managed to leave his country in financial ruin. We should note, nothing of what More lost had to be lost. If he would have simply acknowledged the validity of Henry's second marriage and acknowledged that Henry, not the Pope, was the head of the Church of England, he could have kept it all. But he couldn't be a follower of Christ and lie. Jesus told his apostles, "I am the truth. God is truth." You can't deny the truth and be a follower of the truth. And so what he did makes More a good example of a few important virtues in today's gospel. It's interesting, the most beautiful and important words in the world are in this book because it contains only the Gospels, the words and deeds of Jesus. That's why it looks different. That's why we stand up. That's why we hold it high, honor it with a procession, sometimes candles. It contains the very words of God when God came to live with us as one of us. Every page, an absolute treasure. Yet even as among these words, the words of our gospel today are kind of special. This year on Sundays, we're mostly going through the Gospel of Matthew. And today we're still near the beginning of Jesus' ministry. And if we look carefully, it seems like Matthew has been building to today's gospel. So far in Matthew, we've heard one sentence from Jesus here or there, like to John the Baptist or to Satan in the desert. But we really haven't heard Jesus talking to us, Jesus teaching. Last week, we heard that Jesus started his ministry up in Galilee, up north, if you recall. And right before today's gospel, Matthew tells us that Jesus went all through that region, teaching, although he doesn't give us the words, and healing every disease and disability among the people. And his fame spread in all directions, and great crowds were following him. It's extraordinary as it's been building. And it's only at this point that Matthew is finally ready to let us hear Jesus talking to the people, talking to us. And Matthew was with him by this time, and Matthew was with him every day for a long time. And Matthew chooses these words, today's gospel, to let us hear Jesus talking to the people. These are the first words of teaching in what's probably the first gospel, the first words of a beautiful sermon that runs for 3 chapters. And the very first words of these first words of teaching to us are, "Blessed are the poor in spirit." But what does that mean? Poor in spirit. I spent a long time, I think, not really knowing, and the phrase was kind of confusing. I mean, I thought we were trying to become spiritually better, right? Spiritually pretty good, not spiritually poor. Well, since then, I've learned, and the Catechism confirms, that poverty of spirit refers to an internal spiritual disposition that's not attached to material things, right? The Catechism and our theology refer to this as a spirit of detachment, not being attached to the things of this world, being able to let them go. Now, with all the wealth that Thomas More had, it might seem surprising that our spiritual director in formation gave More as the example of being poor in spirit. But the key is that More held his wealth and all the things of this world loosely. To do good, to do the right thing for Christ, he could let go of his wealth. We're all called to be like that. We're all called to a spirit of detachment. The Catechism says it's actually an obligatory virtue of the faithful. And the saints teach that we need to be detached from the things of this world so we can be open to what God wants us to do, because if we can't let go, those things that we can't let go of can hold us back. Thinking that life is about things and that wealth and money are how you keep score is a kind of slavery. But as we move toward detachment, that is when life really begins. That's liberation. Jesus says the truth, his path, the truth will set you free. Poverty of spirit, learning to let go, is the path to real freedom. And there are at least a couple more beatitudes, a couple more, virtues in our gospel today, the last 2 that also speak to detachment. Because we're called not just to be detached from wealth and material goods, but from all the things of this world. And that may include the esteem of every person, or always having things easy. Jesus says, "Blessed are those who are persecuted for the sake of righteousness." Blessed are you when they insult you and persecute you and lie about you because of me. Jesus begins this series of virtues with detachment, and that's how he ends it. And at the end, he repeats it twice. Detachment, detachment, detachment. The Bible warns us that the things of this world include not only the desires of the flesh and wealth, but also something called the pride of life, being esteemed by others, part of the in crowd, part of the popular group, the majority. Once again, Thomas More was in that group for most of his life. He just wasn't enslaved to it. If Christ was outside of it, he could stand with Christ. Every now and then, the words of Jesus give us an opportunity to sort of check ourselves, to see if we're really following Jesus or just listening to him. You know, like Herod used to like to listen to John the Baptist. The Beatitudes give us one of those opportunities To be really following Jesus is to be detached from material things, or at least working on it. It does not mean we can't have material things. Thomas More had a lot of material things. It simply means we hold them loosely and we use them, let go of them generously for good and for God. And we have to be more devoted to the truth, to Christ, than the easy path and the pride of life. If we find ourselves opposing what the church teaches because that's easier, that's not good. When Luke gives us some of the same Beatitudes as in this gospel, he includes Jesus flipping it around. Jesus says, "Woe to you when all speak well of you, because like the false prophets, you speak what they want to hear." You never want to be in a sentence where God says, "Woe to you." Now, of course, we should only express the truth with gentleness and respect and with love. But in that spirit, bearing witness to the truth is an act of love. And certainly we can be close to God and well respected by everyone. For most of his life, probably no one was more highly esteemed than St. Thomas More. But again, More held that loosely. And at the end, when all his peers were going the other way, he used his great reputation for good and for God. More was so well known and respected throughout Europe that when he gave his life for the truth, it resounded throughout Europe, not just England, but throughout Europe. Jesus said, we can't serve both God and the things of this world. And Thomas More knew that. His last words were, "I die the king's good servant, but God's first." May God grant each of us true poverty of spirit and a heart detached from the things of this world, because it longs above all else for the goodness of God.